Let's go back now to the Brexit debate that's been going on since about 12:30 and will continue until there is a vote on the legislation tomorrow. The bill will give Theresa May the authority to trigger Article 50 and start the process of leaving the EU. Let's talk to our chief political correspondent, Vicky Young. And Vicky, bring us up to date with what's been going on.
Well, the argument from the government has been that this bill and passing this bill is all about trusting the people. A referendum was held, they say. The result has happened. The UK is leaving the European Union, and now those negotiations must start. But already today in this debate, which will go on till midnight tonight, you can just hear MPs, many of them wrestling with their conscience. Many of them were very much Remain campaigners, but they feel that they can't block this because it goes against the will of the people. Now, one of those, the Conservative Anna Soubry, said she backed the idea of a referendum, so with a heavy heart she was going to be voting with the government tomorrow.
I believe history will not be kind to this Parliament, nor indeed the government I was so proud to serve in. How on earth did we ever come to put an alternative to the people, which we then said would make them worse off, less safe, and would weaken our nation? I greatly fear, and echoing the wise words of some of the speech from my honourable new friend, the member for Sheffield Hallam, that I greatly fear generations who either didn't vote or are yet to come will not thank us for our great folly.
Now, another who campaigned to Remain was the Labour MP Margaret Beckett. She said she too would support Article 50, these negotiations getting underway, even though she said she thought the consequences would be catastrophic. She was now looking at the idea of Parliament having a final say on the deal.
When this process is concluded, the European Parliament will have the right to vote on the outcome. If taking back control means anything, it must mean that this House enjoys the same rights.
Yeah. So heavy hearts on one side of the debate, but on the other, jubilation, really. People like Ian Duncan-Smith, who for years and years have campaigned for the UK to leave the European Union.
I will be voting to trigger Article 50 simply because I believe that all the mistakes of the past were that somehow you can place your trust in a larger body and they will do a lot of your protections for you. You cannot. As a nation-state, we can be in Europe but not run by the European Union, and that is why I'm voting to trigger Article 50 tomorrow.
And alongside him, the campaigner John Redwood, who has over the decades fought to leave the European Union. He said people were being far too pessimistic. He said it was time to be optimistic about day one outside the EU.
The everything that changes is we have power to make our own choices, and nothing changes because we will guarantee continuity and allow people the benefits of the laws we have already inherited. What is it about freedom they don't like? What is it about having power back in our Parliament that they cannot stand? Mr. Speaker, the once and future sovereign Parliament of the United Kingdom, vote to make it sovereign again. That is what the people challenge you to do.
Well, let's discuss this a little bit more. I'm joined by the Liberal Democrats' Brexit spokesman, Nick Clegg. Many MPs today saying that with a heavy heart they're going to back Article 50 because they respect the referendum result. Your party has no such qualms.
No, so what we're saying is that since the Brexit campaigners didn't spell out to the British people what Brexit meant in practice, and we still don't know what the actual final outcome will be of these torturous negotiations, it's only right to give the British people a say at the end of the process, much as they were given a say at the beginning. But one of the things that came up repeatedly in today's debate, which I think is weighing heavily on people's consciences, is that, yes, of course, overall, the vote was narrowly won in favour of Brexit, but amongst the youngsters, the young people who voted in huge numbers, who are the only people amongst the electorate who will actually have to live with the consequences of the decisions we take today, of course they voted massively, 73% in favour of Remain. So I think people, the more they looked at the outcome of the referendum, the more I think they've appreciated that there's a great deal of complexity, a great deal of uncertainty, and that maybe the British people should be given a say at the end of the process, much as they were given a say at the beginning.
But the numbers aren't there for you in the House of Commons. What about this idea of Parliament having a vote at the end of the process, a vote maybe 6 months before the 2 years are up? Is that something your party would vote?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that that's a given. I mean, it should be standard practice that if you extricate yourself, as we are seeking to, or as the government is seeking to, from a very complex international club of which we've been a member for 40 years, the final arrangements on that, which will determine so much of people's livelihoods. It'll determine how we keep our rivers and our drinking water clean. It'll determine what the kind of standards by which we, manufacture cars. It'll determine jobs and livelihoods and day and weekly, wage packets. All of these things will be determined by the detail of the final deal. And of course, that should be subject to a parliamentary vote. And crucially, in my view, that must be a vote that takes place here before votes take place in other parliaments, like the European Parliament or the French Parliament and so on. It would be absurd for MPs not to have as great, if not a greater say than parliamentarians elsewhere.
People who are watching this, who voted to leave the European Union, they will say you would like to stay in the European Union, you'd be very open about that, you would like to block the referendum results. Staying in the single market, for most people, is effectively saying staying in the EU.
Well, that's not self-evidently the case. There are countries that are not members of the European Union.
You'd pay to have access, the single market access.
Look, I've never wavered in my view that the best option of all the available options is to be a full member of a club, where you get all the privileges and all the benefits as well as paying your dues and so on. But I think the next best option, if I can put it like that, would be to mimic something similar to what Norway has got, which minimises the economic disruption. Look, I'll give you an example. Just this week, a study came out showing that in the city where I'm an MP, in Sheffield, over 50% of things that are exported from Sheffield go to the European Union. Only 2% go to China. Only 12% go to the United States. So even if you now negotiate the most all singing, all dancing new trade agreements with the United States and China and other countries, it will never match or replace the amount of trade we do with our nearest neighbours. Why? There's a very good reason for that. People tend to trade most intensely with their closest neighbours. So I don't believe, I'm afraid, this I think will prove to be an illusion, that there's this great global utopia out there which can replace what we will lose in our own European neck of the woods.
But aren't you concerned, though, that if your idea is that, yes, you keep some Norway-type option, you're then restricted because you can't do deals, can you, outside? In some ways, you're really just not got a seat at the table, you haven't got any power, but you're paying a lot of money for the access. No,
I agree there are compromises, and it's not as ideal as being a full leading member of the continent in which we so happen to inhabit. But I think it's certainly better than I think these totally illusory ideas that somehow we can stitch together new trade agreements with Papua New Guinea, with Bangladesh and with all sorts of other countries, and that will replace what we lose with traditional major trading partners from Ireland to Germany and so on in our own neck of the woods. But the Norway-style option, as it happens, is that they are in the single market, but they're out of the customs union. So they do negotiate their own trade deals, but they don't lose the unqualified, unfettered, unlimited access to major European markets. But look, I'm simply saying, if you're going to cast around for alternatives to full EU membership, that's a better place to start than do what the government has said, which is in effect to claim to the world that we can have our cake and eat it. So if you listen to David Davis, he says we're not going to abide by the rulings of the single market, but we're going to have just the same amount of access to the single market. That is a logical impossibility. And so I guess people like me now need to step back and look at the way the negotiations are conducted. I hope people like me, I certainly, speaking for myself, will do this. I hope I will have the humility of acknowledging, if in 5 years' time it all turns out to be brilliant, to acknowledging that I was wrong. I also hope, however, the kind of utopian Brexiteers who are promising this great paradise to everybody of 350 million quid for our NHS every week and all these great trade deals would also have the humility to admit that they got it wrong if it doesn't turn out like that.
Okay, thank you very much, Nick Clegg. So the vote, as we were saying, will be tomorrow at 7 o'clock. The government's not really expecting this to be too tricky for them at this stage. There is a problem, I think, maybe for them when it comes to this idea of a final vote, and certainly maybe a tricky times ahead in the House of Lords.